Hello, good afternoon. This is Malal from Hearts and Minds Development Center again. So today we don't have to work a lot on introducing the speaker because we know he's got a lot of both secret and public admirers, right, from the last session. As you would know, we're bringing Darrell Lourdes again because we know there's so much of wisdom in him that we need to get out. So without further ado, today we're going to talk about living with our divided self with Darrell Lourdes. So put your hands together, get ready to ask him all the questions that you might have about feeling divided. So let's bring on Darrell.
Hi, Mala.
Hi, Darrell. How are you?
Okay, I'm good. Thanks for the re-invite.
Well, we're going to have you, I'm very sure, many more times because, that's our interest in you. So thank you for saying yes, and thank you for making time again with us. We know a lot of people benefited from the last session that we had because the views continue to increase over time. So we were trying to figure out whether it was your content or your looks, but we've decided it's the content. All right? Yeah. Because if it was looks, they would have just come, see, and then go, right? But we have people watching the video. So obviously, the stuff that you're bringing in is really important. And of course, before we talk about living with the divided self, because I'm really curious to know what is this divided self all about, I'm just going to say hello to a couple of people who have come up. So good afternoon. Yay, Nate has joined us. Nate is the latest kid on the block in the area of therapy. Good afternoon, Nate. Good afternoon, Louise. Gerald, of course, all time. There's a LinkedIn user, so I'm not too sure whether that's Mangesh or Carl. You need to tell me your name. So these are some people who seem, who are visible, who have said hello. So welcome to the session. We are going to be talking to Darrell Lourdes about the divided self, right? And of course, this topic, Alia says Darrell. However, that's going to sound to you. She says Darrell, right? So Ali, I'm going to try and sound like you, Darrell. Okay. Eleanor, hi. Eleanor, Lisa, George, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. So, of course, I went to Darrell after the last conversation and I said, and we did a poll and it was very interesting that, the people wanted us to talk about, or they wanted to have sessions around personal growth, right? And when I spoke to Darrell, I said, what can we do? And I was thinking around identity, and of course, Darrell being Darrell, knows better, and he said, let's talk about the divided self. So what was interesting when I spoke to Darrell, he said living with the divided self. I would have been interested is not, reconciling and not having a divided self. But when you say living with divided self, I thought that was really interesting. As I say that, hi Nizam, I see you. Yes, we can't see your name, so I will assume it is you, Nizam. Thank you very much for coming. So Darrell, really tell us what do we mean by divided self? Help us understand divided self a little bit more.
You know, I think there are many different ways of looking at the divided self. Yeah, so but all of us will recognize within ourselves we have maybe you can use the word a self that was given to us almost by our upbringing, by our circumstances. Sometimes we take on a job because we are desperate for the job, but we may not really enjoy what we're doing. But the family needs the money. Yeah, so your circumstances makes you do things, and you in your job is still the person, but inside us we kind of striving for something else. So it's almost like saying you have a given self and a chosen self, right? So if I had the freedom to choose whatever I wanted, then I might choose something different. So all of us have a certain level of division in us. And the reason I kind of said living with the divided self is we need to learn to live with the divided self as we try to match, the ideal part of us and what is real in us. And quite often, in therapy, when people come in, it's because that division has become too much and they can't stand it anymore. And sometimes if the division is too much, it expresses itself in funny ways. Yeah, so, a simple story to maybe drive home this idea of the divided selves. I think stories are a better way of kind of grappling with this idea. So one was a story that was told to me by a close friend, John, who visited his doctor in Loguan Lai. Loguan Lai is a very famous hospital in Penang. And when he went in, he saw at the doctors behind, doctors behind them, they have all their certificates. And there was missing pieces, almost of his certificates on the wall.
Yeah.
And he asked him, hey, what is going on? You've sent it for reframing. And he said, no, this will be the last time you'll be seeing me here. And he said, all my life, I wanted to become a professor of literature, but he was born into a family of doctors and he had no choice to become a doctor. And, while he's been successful, working in Loguan Lai, of course, you must be very successful, right? He's never managed to bridge that division between himself and wanting to become a literature professor. So when he saved enough money, he gave the money back to his father with the certificates. He passed back his medical certificate, and he was leaving for Australia in the coming weeks to actually study literature to become a professor. So it's a very clear example where there is a division. We live with the division. At some point, when things get better or the moment is more correct, we can kind of look for congruence. So that's what I mean by divided self. If I give another example, maybe a more therapeutic one, where the story is not so good, right? So, I worked with a couple, a family actually, 2 kids, mom and dad, and the mother had early stages of schizophrenia, right? So she was hearing voices in her head and she was reacting funnily. And the incident that brought them into therapy was she was with the kids at the swimming pool and she actually just got up, and the kids are small, below 7 years old, and she got up and disappeared. And she said that she had heard voices in her head, and and she kind of responded to those voices. And what was interesting is in the course of therapy, what you discover is, she's a person who's all her life, she grew up poor and she had to start working very young. She met this really nice guy who was quite well off. He took her away from her poverty, but then she ended up almost being a maid in his family house again, and working hard. And she because of her background, I think, her ability to say she's not happy with certain things were not there. So she spent years and years suppressing her voice, suppressing who she is. And, the frustrations manifested as a voice that is external to her, telling her to fight for her rights, making her aggressive. She was breaking things at home, hitting her husband, and so on and so forth. And when I asked her what was happening, she said, I don't know. There's a voice that's making me do this. So, when the self becomes too divided, there's a point where it becomes dangerous. And, there's also, like in the first story of the doctor, you kind of realize you're divided, and you can still do something constructive before it gets too destructive. But the point is, I think all of us, to some extent, live with some level of division. And, the division has to be addressed at some point, by ourselves or with the help of others. Yeah? That's a long answer. That's a long answer to your first question.
No, so one of the reasons you get called back is because of your long answers, because the context that you give is very important, because I think a lot of conversation around well-being, mental health sometimes happens without context. And when we know too little and we take it out of context and apply and make it worse for people, then we're not doing a good job. So I truly appreciate your context and the stories that you give, because while you're giving us some information, we're trying to learn, because the whole idea is to create awareness for us to learn from you, right? And while we're doing that, the example you give may not be the example that I can use in the areas that I'm looking for. So the context becomes very important when I say, okay, Darrell say this, what does that mean? So I think that context is important. So thank you very much. So I like the voice in the head. But before that, you said that when you spoke about the division, right? And you say at some point you begin to recognize, like the from the story of the doctor, where does this sense of needing freedom to be me starts? Is it at adulthood that we recognize, or it's always there? I'm trying to figure myself out as well.
So there is a normal transition in your psychological development. So when you're a child, essentially, you are quite powerless, and you adapt the identity of your parents. Yeah. Right. And then at maybe around 9, 10, 11, 12, it's a normal psychological development where you start trying to form your own identity. So, you kind of realize you're separated from your parents, your own entity, and you want to form your individual identity. And adolescence is a difficult time, because it's really like you're trying to give birth to a self, right? A chosen self. So my parents gave me a self, but now I'm trying to choose the self I want to be. So at that point, you already have this is who I am, but that is who I want to be, A is who I am, but B is who I want to be. And Carl Rogers, if you are interested to read a bit more on this, and I think Carl Rogers has done a lot of work on it. He's the person who introduced person-centered therapy, where he said you don't have to intervene too much. If you learn how to listen deeply, the healing happens. But one of the things that Rogers says is you have two states of identity. One is the actual self, and then the second one is an ideal self. Yeah. Now, the actual self may not have musical skills, but the ideal self wants to play the violin in the Malaysian Philharmonic Orchestra. And, essentially that tension makes us grow in a certain direction. Now, and he uses this word congruence, right? So for me, for example, if I use my own example, I'm kind of a junior therapist. I've started very late in life into family therapy, and family therapy is a difficult area. Now, before I become, a real seasoned therapist, you're talking about another 15, 20 years will pass by. But because I'm seeing families on a weekly basis, and I'm moving towards becoming a family therapist, then there's congruence. And with that congruence is a sense of happiness that comes in. Now, if I'm moving in the opposite direction, let's just say, okay, I needed money, a lot of money all of a sudden, I have to go back to the HR profession that I used to do, which definitely would pay me more money. And I put aside this journey. to be a therapist, then the dissatisfaction, the conflicts within me start to emerge. Yeah, and I need to start managing those conflicts. So the idea here is we have an actual self, or the self we are living every day, and we have an ideal self. I like to use the word a given self, because situation gives you a self, identity, and then you have a chosen self, the person you like to be. And that journey towards the chosen self gives us joy. The journey away from the chosen self, gives us anxiety and difficulties. And as long as we are moving towards the ideal self, there would be congruence. Rogers uses the word congruence. And what you're looking for is a life of congruence, where slowly the two selves are marching together. But I think at no point, unless you're probably the Buddha or something, you're fully integrated. Yeah? You do have characters in history, where people say are enlightened souls. And people like Rumi, or people like the Buddha, where people feel like, oh, they're so integrated. No, there's no contradiction in a person. But I think all of us carry a level of contradiction, and we just have to live with it. Yeah.
So are you saying that when it shows up, when you're feeling the incongruence, and the incongruence becomes uncomfortable for you, I mean, that's when I suppose we start searching and looking for answers and trying to integrate it. So there would always be parts of us, that we continue to work on in the name of development and growth, where, some parts of us will have a chance of integration, and some parts can remain there as long as they're not causing you any problems, basically.
Yeah. And I think you make a good point, right? So our pain is actually our teacher, no? And I think it's so important that to be a person who can accept both pleasurable emotions and painful emotions. Yeah, and the painful emotions are actually sometimes more helpful, because they tell you things that are not right, no? Like if you are hanging out with someone who makes you feel terrible, right? Now, your emotions are kind of nudging you to say, should you be hanging out with this person? Yeah. So in the same way, if you're living a life, if you're in a profession, or in relationships that make you feel not so great, then, the emotion is basically inviting us to introspect and decide what is wrong. So, the best way, if you're driving a car, you look at the petrol meter to figure out whether you need to do something, right? Or you look at the heat of the car. The cars have this thing that tells you whether your engine is overheating or not. So in the same way, as humans, we have our emotions that give us that indicator. And quite often when we have good emotions, I guess just live it fully. But with the bad emotions, then it becomes very important to kind of go in, examine, work with it, figure out what's the story. And quite often, people who come into therapy, not always, but more often than not, they have done some level of pushing away the negative emotions. You don't deal with the pain, and then after some time it accumulates, it becomes so big that it becomes unmanageable, and then you need some form of help.
So tell me a little bit about when you say push away, because two things came to my mind when you were saying, right? You said, I'm in total agreement with you, where pain is a space that we really grow, and that's where we build our resilience. And there's enough information around that, right? But it also sounds as if you're trying to sell this idea of, oh, pain is good for us, right? Now, and you did say that if you're with you're in relationships where you're not happy, I think that's easy in the sense that if I'm with people and I'm not feeling good, for me it would be, if I'm not feeling good, when the pain really gets a bit unbearable, that's when I want to solve the problem. Otherwise I tend to tolerate it. All right. And that's when I might really push myself in a corner and think about, do I really need this or not? Do I really want to be part of this relationship? But I'm very curious to know, have you met people who are probably in relationships that we can see is hurting them, but when you talk to them, they actually think they are happy?
So maybe I just back up a little bit, right? So the so people who are in abusive relationships, generally don't see the relationship as problematic. Yeah. Now, I just want to back up a little. I don't mean every time the relationship is painful, we run away from it. Yeah, because the pain may be coming from the outside world, but the pain may be also be coming from ourselves. Yeah,
Sure.
so it's not really it's not as straightforward as that. All I was
Sure.
trying to emphasize is, the emotions are there to teach us to take a second look, right?
Right.
Rather than go away. Because in a lot of couples therapy, the people are in tremendous pain, right? They're coming in
Mm.
because they are in pain, and both people are in pain, right? But
Mm.
there is something in each of them that need a level of healing that brings
Mm.
them into therapy. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So maybe I finish that thought first. Yeah. I give you a very concrete example, right? So just the other day I was working with a couple where the wife gets extremely angry and just loses her cool, has a meltdown basically when they have a fight. And that the husband doesn't know how to handle it. Yeah. And her anger with the situation is, she say, he treats me like I'm a child. So
Mm.
when we worked on the problem, the issue, and the husband feels she's unreasonable, no, she has this crazy meltdown. How do you work with someone like that, right? And when I asked her, look, when you have this meltdown, how old do you feel you are? And emotions are interesting. Huh? If you follow the emotions, it kind of takes you to the problem. And she said, oh, she thought about it. She said, I feel 18. And then I asked her, so what happened when you were 18, right? So she tells me the story about, she's a only child, very protective family, can't do anything for herself. At some point when she was in a babysitter, she was sexually harassed, assaulted. So the parents have become, doubly careful, right? So she's already 18. She has no life as a teenager. Everything is controlled. So when she was 18, she just rebelled. She exploded. And
Mm.
the only way she could get her parents' attention was to really explode, like a volcano, so that they could not stop her from having some level of freedom. Teenagers, they want to go out, they want to meet friends, they want to party a little bit. So she kind of used that as a mode. Now, this way of exploding has stayed with her for the next 12 years of her life,
Wow.
right? So in the session, I asked her, hey, um, you know, um, what would a 30-year-old person do compared to an 18-year-old person? And it was almost like she was stunned by the question that, hey, there's a different response from the 18-year-old. No? And then we started to work with her, differentiating herself from the 18-year-old self. So, there was a
Mm.
problem in the relationship, but the problem was coming from her. But what is interesting in the story is the husband had a father who had bipolar. He got bipolar when he was 14. Yeah.
Mm.
And so at 14, he had to become the father of his father. He had to learn this demeanor of pacifying things, calming things down, and he's now about 33, and his whole self is about being a father. So when he interacts with his wife, he doesn't know how to be a peer because he's trained himself. His self is almost stuck with being the father, and
Mm.
the wife's self is stuck with being the 18-year-old, right? So the pain sometimes reveals to you deeper problems, and those deeper problems, once uncovered, 3 weeks after that session, the couple told me that they seem to have stopped fighting. And sometimes you just need to unblock certain things, and then they can move forward. So the pain is a good thing that you trace and go and find what's the root problem, but it doesn't mean that we run away from every relationship because of the pain. But coming back to your question, you asked about that. The people in abusive relationships. So I had this girl lady lah. She's not a girl. She's 35. Yeah, she's a lady, and she's been in a marriage, and the husband is terribly abusive, a real beater, right? And what is interesting is she grew up with a mother who's also a beater. Yeah, so she's and children have a very conflicted view of their parents. So if the parents hits them, abusive to them, they still love the parents. So you get a bit confused on what is love and what is not. And in the course of therapy, one of the things she said is, I thought the abuse was love. You can get, because her mother was the protector, yet she was abusive. So she saw the husband as sort of the protector, but still abusive, right? And you can get quite confused on what is good and bad. And what is good and bad is quite subjective. Yeah. But in this case, it's against the law to hit someone. So it's not that subjective, But, there is confusion that comes in. So which comes back to your question that you asked.
Right. I have, my God, so many questions lining up for you just from me. Not sure whether I can take more questions from the audience. So I'm going to just welcome a couple of people who've come on board so that, we know that we see you. So hello, there's a Karupia Sinapan. I believe he knows you. He's saying hello to both of us. Hi, Karupia. John Peter Ganesan, yes, you made it all the way from India. Vernon, so good to see you. Yeah, keep an eye on Darrell. I'm sure you want to bring him on your show too. Nirmala, thank you for coming. Chiu Hokpun, thank you for coming. You saw the tone was different. Dato Aminatun, thanks for the support. And Daniel, you liked my question. So good. Thanks for coming again, Daniel. Now, Nate is asking us a question. Nate is a therapist, and he said, can we avoid to go through the pain but learn from the wisdom only? Because if it's too painful to go through, right? If we have to, then what is the best way or tools to overcome that pain? Example, grief, flashbacks are hard. So I think what Nate is asking is that, can I not go through the physical pain, but learn from the wisdom?
So, I'm not sure whether Nate is asking the question as a client or an onlooker, right? I think as an onlooker, we can look at many things and learn from it. We don't need to, if we see people using alcohol as a way to deal with emotional pain, we don't need the experience to figure out there's something wrong in the method, right? But I think for clients, quite often, our center is called a multi-generational center. So what we do is we do work with past problems that have caused the pain. And sometimes when past problems are not dealt with, are just left alone, buried under the ground. This comes back to the conversation of not dealing with the pain that's there. Then it reappears in adult life and it starts causing problems. Yeah. So like in the case of that couple I shared, where the husband had a father who has bipolar, he basically what he'd done is, in order to survive his family life, he just sucked it in and he became the father of the family. Yeah. And never really processed that whole thing that had happened to him. And he just lived that life as the father of the family. And then when he found his wife, he tried to be a peer initially, but he found it too difficult because all his life he's just played the role of the superior one, right? And when he tried to be a peer and he couldn't handle it, he went back to becoming her father again, right? So, and unless we go back and deal with what had happened in the past and we reframe what had happened in the past, and therapy is quite often a very slow, safe space where the client is encouraged to deal with what had happened, and the interpretation that a 9-year-old child gives to a bad situation, or even an 18-year-old child gives to a bad situation, or a 14-year-old boy may not be the right interpretation, and then we carry the story in our heads and we go through life. And when we become adults, at some point, life challenges the story. Yeah. Okay. And if you're lucky enough, we'll have a partner who challenges that story that we carry, and we need to reinterpret it. So if the client trying to learn without going back to heal the wound is, I think, quite hard, because they're already trapped in that situation, and you need to kind of give the situation some air, so that the healing can happen. Yeah, but as individuals, we can learn from many, many things. But I find that for me personally, my best lessons have come out of pain.
Yeah.
you know it's I know this sounds morbid, no, but sometimes the painful experiences have a very deep learning component to it compared to the happy events. And I think it's also the way the brain is structured, right? The brain is structured for survival. So if you miss the sunrise, you don't get into trouble. If you miss the tiger, you get eaten up. Yeah, so the brain is prone to be drawn towards the negative. And so we need to kind of work sometimes with the negative, and it's easier sometimes for the negative to take root in us. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, thank you. So Alia is asking a question, but I'm going to hold on to Alia's question because I've got a couple of questions for you about childhood, right? So what you're saying is that when you spoke about past generations and people taking on roles because it is required. Sometimes you take on bigger roles, you step into roles because it requires you to be that person, and you decide to step into those roles. And we spoke about it, I think, in the last session, right? You did say how you choose to step into the roles, and then you forget. But I want to just go back to a couple of things that you said earlier about childhood, because I think I see a lot of parents who are coming through. I mean, people I know who are parents, and I'm a parent, so I'm very interested. You did say that we give our child our identity in the beginning, or the child takes on the identity given by the parents, right? So what's your quick advice or input, right, or wisdom that you can give us to, for what can we do as parents to help the child find herself, himself, and form a differentiated identity? What can we do from the beginning as parents? How do we need to grow and say, how can I look at my child and say, oh, okay, my child is really having a healthy personal identity, instead of taking mine on and then struggle later to find that, oh my goodness, I am not sure who I am. So do you have an answer to that?
It's a very big and complex question. No answer that is given will kind of.
We'll forgive you
solve.
for a short, straightforward answer, but I'll tell you why, because I think there are a lot of things that you've said, and I'm very sure we'll bring you in for parenting again, and you will say yes to us. So if you want Darrell to do something on parenting, put a yes, put a note on the comment so that we force him to come back. But right now, tell us what can you do?
So, we learn a lot more through osmosis than what is said.
Okay.
Yeah. So behavior is learned by looking.
Okay.
A lot of things are learned by looking. Yeah. So I think the starting point for parents is, they should be living a life that they themselves admire. So when a parent look at themselves in the mirror, they may say, "Wow, I like being you."
Right.
It's quite fun
Right.
to be you, because the child will look at such a parent and say, "Wow, it's fun to be him. I also want to be something like that," right? And I think the other area would be the relationship between the spouse, right? If it's functional, then the child will learn how to build functional relationship. If there's give and take, there's compromise, there's sufficient challenge. If there's a fight, the fight doesn't go crazy and you can find resolution. Those kind of habits are picked up. So the child is a sponge that is looking at what the
Right.
family is doing, right? And if the child has siblings, siblings are not close if there's favoritism. Yeah. So if parents can have a measure of equality among the children, then the siblings have a great union, and they realize that this equality, this fairness is there. We can be good siblings with each other. So a lot of it is not so much focus, I think, on the child, but it's really focused on the relationship of the parents, how they interact with the other siblings, how they interact with each other, and how they interact with the child, right? Now, coming to the interaction with the child, I think there are two critical components that are important for the interaction. One is the nurturing part, right? So there must be a tremendously strong friendship with the child. Yeah. And then the second component is there has to be discipline. So where it goes wrong is Either you have parents who are fully nurturing, no discipline. And when I say discipline, I mean, the ability to show anger, to say, I'm not happy with this. The ability to make some demands, which are reasonable, like, do well in school. And if you find the child is not academic, then you say, at least try and be the captain of the football team. Yeah. So you demand some level of excellence from the child. So there's that discipline part. And then you also have the nurturing part. The nurturing part is, when the child is in pain, you can pull them in, hug them, love them into wholeness. And when they want to explore, you can let them go. This is another part. Parents sometimes, struggle to let the child go and explore. And it's part of the child's job to explore, right? So if you can nurture them and you can give them structure, the chances of the early childhood being very strong is there. But then when they hit teenage years, this is when the identity formation happens. And I think a lot of teenagers, we get a lot of families coming in when the boy or girl are a teenager, right? That is really peak, especially 14, 15, 16. Yeah. Then the parents feel there's something wrong with my child. I have to come for family therapy, and they come into the center, right? And the reason is because the child's job is to criticize the parents. It's almost like a job description, right? Now they're trying to form their own identity that is separate from the parents. How do you do that? You have to kind of say, okay, my parents don't have this, they don't have that. I compare them with my friends' parents. So there's a certain level of evaluation that's going on. And parents sometimes struggle with this evaluation, to accept it. If parents can see that as a stage in life, knowing that they will come back to them later, it will be a lot less pressure on the parents and on the child. And the child at that stage needs two very specific things. They need autonomy, that means a bit of freedom to develop their own identity, and they need a sense of belonging. So if a parent says, okay, if you go down that path, I'm going to disown you, now that is a threat to the sense of belonging. But if you have this unwavering sense that I have a home, and this home loves me, and I have some level of freedom, not 100% freedom. So I had three boys, so you can imagine they are now in their 20s, but they all were teenagers at the same time. Yeah, so they had some level of freedom, but there has to be a certain boundary to the freedom, so that they can still experiment and develop their identity and choose who they want to be. Now, I think another thing I'll just mention really quickly before I move away from this is, it's really important to help the child identify their strengths, because it is much more fun living a life using your strengths than focus on your weakness. So, if a child is a good public speaker, you do everything you can to build their speaking skills. If a child is a great sports person, you do everything you can so that they can excel to whatever level they can excel, right? If they're academically inclined, then you do whatever you can to help them, move towards their academic goal. Okay. And I think this working with the child's strength is another important piece. So once they hit 18, 19, they leave the home, they go to the university, then the control of the parents is a lot less already by that stage. But, the teenage years, if you've done well in the primary school period, and you do well in the secondary school period, I think we have done our job. The rest is up to the kids to figure out how to live.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask you to speed up your answers because we have 20 minutes and you have a lot of wisdom. I can't sleep if I don't get my questions answered. So I'm going to ask you a couple of straight, direct questions about childhood because you've brought it up and I think it's good to address it now, right? You gave the example of the case study just now. So Nirmala says, very much resonate a typical conversation I was having just with my husband so recently of his divided self. Oh, Nirmala, how lucky your husband is, right? Because you're already, so your husband doesn't need Darrell. Tell him he should be grateful. Okay, so as we do that, now you spoke about the example of the mother who was the protector and also, was beating or abusing the kid. Now, I do know, even in our current situation, I personally know some parents who strongly believe that, physically hurting their children is actually a way to discipline. What have you got to say to them in terms of the long-term impact? Because I think what happens is that, when you control either with very strong emotional threats, or you control them with, physical abuse, and it is abuse, right? What is the impact in their long-term growth and identity?
Mala, I'm not capable of short answers, right?
I know, but I had to ask it. So try and speed up. Use this as your practice space so that you get to it. Level. You
To
can do
speed
this.
up. Okay, so last Tuesday, I worked with a couple. The man was abused as a child.
Right.
Right. And what was interesting is when we were exploring the week before, right, his history, he makes a very important realization in the session, or he shares something that's very important, right? He said he was beaten a lot, but that didn't hurt him as much as when his caregiver said, "You will be a useless person when you grow up." And he found that the hurt of the words lingered on. But the thing that really hurt him the most, as we just explored, because when someone has such a unfortunate childhood, you tend to explore to see, whether there's a lot of lingering things. He mentioned something about he being locked at the back of the house in the dark when he's 7 or 8 years old, not knowing whether he can enter the house again. And the isolation was probably even more painful than the words. Yeah. So this is very extreme. I don't think the parents on this call do things like this, right? But what is really important is, if you notice, it was the isolation that is most painful. And it's the hitting that is least effective. And, I think as parents, I would say you can practice isolation. So the general rule of thumb is, if a child misbehaves, instead of hitting them or telling them you're a bodo, isolate them for a short while. And a short while, the norm that they give, is, if the child is 7 years old, you isolate them for 7 minutes. If they're 9, you isolate them for 9 minutes. And that seems to be effective enough to drive the message home. Because in truth, the isolation is most painful. No? If you look at prison sentence, the worst thing is when they lock you up alone in the room with no other prisoners. Solitary confinement. That's the biggest punishment in prison, because they have realized that when you isolate someone, the pain is tremendous.
Yeah, but as parents, by isolating, are we encouraging punishment?
So
or
punishment,
are we giving?
punishment
Yeah.
is part of parenting. I think at no point do you not, if the child behaves like a brat, it's the parent's job to say, look, there's certain structures that you can't, if a child is rude to an adult in an Asian context, it's the parent's duty to kind of caution the child or punish the child. And you can punish the child today by taking away their iPad for a day or two. You can take away the phone for a day or two. You can ground them from not going out to meet their friends. You can stop them from going and playing their sport. You can have deliberate sorts of punishment that isn't physical or verbally abusive, right?
Is there a difference for you in the words that we use in terms of whether it's punishment or consequences? Is there a difference in the on the impact?
I don't think so. I think the main thing is you want to give the child a level of pain, but the pain has to be respectful.
So give respectful pain is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
You need to offer pain. Sometimes you learn, as a child. And the other mistake a lot of parents do is they pretend the 6-year-old is a little adult. And it's not the case. It's a child, And they, I've seen, I have friends where they get into this long dialogue with the child as if the child is a 40-year-old person who has rational capabilities to reason,
Right.
That is one formula that really puts parenting into chaos. At times, a 6-year-old understands, a scolding,
Mm.
or, sit in the corner for 3 minutes, sort of a thing. Yeah. Those things they understand a lot more. And sometimes when they get into this hyper mood, they themselves can't control their emotions.
Right.
Two approaches. One is to hold them and calm them down, or isolate them and calm them down. And once they learn that, they will learn how to regulate their feelings in public.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah.
All right. So hearing from the expert, respectful, painful experience.
I'm a growing expert. I'm not an expert.
Okay,
I
it's
only
from a
got
growing
into
expert. So
yeah,
let's
I
go
got into
together,
family
right?
therapy in 2019. So yeah.
No worries. But I'm going to work on that because, that's something that is difficult for me. But I'm going to manage that. And when I bring you back the next time, I'll probably have a question. I just want to just read out some comments.
One more comment. Most of the parents who practice hitting are doing ventilation for themselves. When they come
Uh,
into therapy and we talk about it, it's not so much about the child, no? It's really
yeah,
about, I'm so grum that I have to
yeah,
do something with my feelings.
yeah.
And the direction of the feeling is the child.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that was that was if I said it because at least you are a growing therapist. I'm not even a therapist, right? So I'm using your voice of authority to tell people stop hitting your kids because you are the problem. Okay, but thanks. Vernon says, "Wow, adverse childhood experiences does create problems in the future." Of course, Vernon heard about this and wish to know more. Thank you. So Vernon wants you to come back. Shamini Arumugam says, "What a wonderful tip, working with child's strength and propel them to excellence." I think we've been talking a lot about this, and this is where I want to ask you one more question about childhood before we go into the 2 or 3 questions that's been stacking up for you. Now, one of those challenges that I am seeing, and again, I want to use your voice to say it with the growing authority, right? A lot of kids are being, in the name of strength, are being pushed to excel in all areas, not necessarily their preferred area or the real strength or the natural strength, right? Like get all A's. So I send you for 3,000 tuition, and then you do the ballet, and then you do this, and then you do that. So you do everything so that I feel your 10 waking hours every day, and they can excel. These kids do excel by getting A's, right? And sometimes when we run children's program, when they come into my sessions, what I realize is that they are not happy, and they dare not tell their parents because they are trained to think that this is good for me, right? Not having the space, I'm doing well. So what's your take on that, and how do we parents discern how much or whether when too much is abusive in my mind? Okay, Darrell, to you.
Yeah, I'm going to put in a plug for your work on EQ, right? So,
Right.
future success, the data is very strong. Yeah, so there's no more debate on the data. Yeah, you can look up the data, you go and look at journals on this topic. Yeah, if you go on what is this, Google Scholar, you can type journals and you can find a lot of documentation on this. Future success has a lot to do with your EQ, not with your IQ. Yeah, so I think that's the first thing. And EQ develops by sometimes slowing down and interacting, not
Mm,
rushing from one thing to another. Yeah,
mm,
and it's
mm,
really important for reflection and imagination to come in with EQ.
mm, mm,
And people who are imaginative actually are people who look into the sky for a long time and wonder, right? That having the space to wonder actually develops a lot of EQ. Having space, because the speed of emotions is a lot slower than the speed of the mind. So
mm,
having space to look at emotions develops EQ. Interactive experiences. That means you sit down with the child and play a board game, and then the child loses the game and starts crying, and then you put the child on your lap and you talk to the child about what had just happened in the game, and you teach them life lessons, like in life you win and lose. Yeah, so those kind of things builds resilience, for example, right? So resilience and EQ seems to differentiate success a lot more than academic success. Yeah, so if the activities we are choosing develops the person's emotional intelligence and develops resilience, develops the ability to reflect on life, those are good things. But, I think what you're asking is there are parents who fill the child's schedule up. They are busier than the CEO of Shell, kind of a lifestyle. I think the real question there is, whose ambition is this child living?
Yeah.
And I think if a parents can honestly say this ambition belongs to the child and it's not my ambition being imposed on the child, I think fine. But if you can't really say with honesty that this is my ambition, that this is not my ambition, I just am doing it because this is what the child is choosing, or this is what's good for the child, then it becomes problematic. I think quite often, you find not always, but many incidences where the parents has unfulfilled dreams. The ideal self is not fulfilled, and now they transfer that chosen self, into the child, and now the child has the burden of living out that chosen self for the parent, and that's tough.
So, would you say that if a child who then grows into an adult and who's taken on the parents' aspiration and dreams and makes it their dream, because sometimes in certain Asian contexts, certain type of cultures, right, we literally not idol worship, we worship our parents, right? And when you take on and you say, I want to do this because this is the way I show gratitude to my parents for all the sacrifices there. You have all of these stories going on, narratives in your head, right? Do you think that people who live their parents' life, and they say it, they say it, and they're very open about it, so they acknowledge it. So do you think that they eventually reach a point at some point in their life where they begin to recognize the divided self in the sense of unhappiness, unfulfilled and stuff like
Yeah.
that? Or yeah.
So, I think there are two cases. So I grew up in Penang, and I know the children of the late Karpal Singh, for example. Yeah.
Mm,
And most of his children became lawyers except for one. Yeah.
mm,
And the eldest son and us were peers. We learned how to consume alcohol together, basically. Yeah. And they admired the father so much. He was such a hero to them. And he's actually a very warm and gentle man when you meet him at home, a real father,
mm.
not his public image at all, right? And they admired him so much that, they kind of pushed towards law as a profession and became lawyers, right? And I think if the child is choosing a profession out of admiration, I wouldn't see anything wrong with it, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then, like the story of the doctor that I mentioned, his story was the family did not give you a choice. You had to be a doctor,
Right.
right? And he really, from a young age, did not want to be a doctor, but he had to oblige. So in
Mm,
his 40s, he had enough strength to say no. Yeah, and
nice.
sometimes we have to wait till we have enough muscles to say no and move in our own direction. Yeah, so it's not a
Provided we are building muscles, right? Provided
yeah,
we
yeah,
are building muscles in those areas of
yeah.
your building your own identity. So would it be okay for me to quickly summarize that, to say that whatever your choices are, check within to see what sort of emotions that's showing up. Do you feel at home with it? Do you feel fulfillment? Because those are some of the signs, external signs that you can feel and you can know the difference. Because from what you're saying about the story from Karpal Singh's kids, is that sometimes when you see the people you see, and when you idolize them, and if it happens to be your parents, they are just showing you, helping you to recognize what you desire, which might be very close to your own ideals, right?
Yeah, yeah. And,
Yeah,
a lot of children who admire their parents end up
yeah,
doing the profession of their parents. Yeah.
and that's fine
Uh,
because yeah, sorry.
no, and that's fine. Yeah, because the father, the mother is a role model, and then they kind of say, okay, I like the profession too. They're so in love with the parents that they want to do that profession. Yeah, nothing
Nice.
wrong with
Okay.
that.
Thanks,
Yeah.
thanks. Louis says, oh, very valuable input from the speaker, which means you have to come again. Mallory, you're doing a great service to the society. Keep up the good work. This is what happens when you have friends on the show. They are like, helping you. So
Cheering
questions,
you on.
yeah, cheering me up. And these are wonderful friends who spend their, Friday, 12 o'clock to encourage me. So Vernon is asking an interesting question. So Vernon says, adults who have issues need to look at their own adverse childhood experiences. What do you think?
So that is one source, lah. We won't make that the total source, right? Because childhood experiences can make us stuck, especially in relationships. That's true. And quite often, a lot of the stuck points in relationship has to do with something in the past. Yeah. But sometimes, the present moment, we can take on a wrong role, for example, in the present moment. Yeah, and that also can cause problems. The childhood is long past, right? And we make poor judgments. We don't develop skills that are needed for conflict communication, for example. Yeah, and not having skills for conflict resolution in a marriage,
right,
causes havoc, right? Causes a lot of havoc in a person's life, and that's a skill that can be learned. And if you kind of go and look at John Gottman, or you look at Markman, all these people have developed tools that you can learn and develop skills. The Singapore government is very interesting. When you are about to get married now, they have worked with Denver University, where Howard Markman works, and he is a person who teaches people how to have conflict. And they teach these couples how to have conflict before they get married.
nice.
As a very proactive way of doing things. So there are problems that are stuck in the here and now, and there are problems that are stuck in the past. And then also you do have biological problems, because mental health sometimes is a biological challenge. So you take someone who has ADHD. All of us have a part in the front of our brain that helps us regulate and focus. And people with ADHD, for example, that part of the brain is not so activated. So when you take a small amount of medication and that part gets activated, Dr. Lai says this is the policeman in the brain, right? So if the policeman is asleep, you have to wake him up so that he can direct the traffic. And once you wake up the person, then, the problems disappear. And, adults with ADHD struggle in their marriage. And no amount of therapy sometimes can help them because they just can't focus. So when you think of problems that a person faces, there are multiple directions in which we need to go. And I think the three main directions is check whether it's something biological, check whether it's something to do with my personality, and, check whether it's something to do with the past. And then if you kind of figure out where it's coming from, then, you can resolve it. Personality is like if you're always seeing the glass half empty, at some point being depressed would be a definite outcome. Yeah. If you keep looking at all that is missing. Yeah. So the sources are multiple, but yes, there's a lot in the family of origin.
So I like this because you've given us three components to think about. So if we have an issue, so Vernon, thank you for the great question. First, check biologically how you're made, so that if that's where it's stemming from, then you can do something about it. Personality is really who you are and how you are contributing. The way you think is contributing to the issues that you're facing. So go and build muscles around that. And of course, then there's that past, which could be our childhood and the way we've learned how to tell stories in our head or the narratives that we live in. So there are three things that we can actually do. And, I suppose when the negative emotion shows up, we can then, move backwards and say, okay, I understand where this is coming from and go and solve that. Gerald says, good information. I also believe if we want our children to excel and grow, we as parents first need to transform ourselves into a loving, joyful, peaceful being.
Mm.
If our children's love tank is full at all times, many things can be achieved. Yes. Darrell is nodding, which means he's agreeing with you, Gerald. And yeah, he must meet your daughter and he will know how full your daughter is. I'm going to deal with two more questions before I sort of ask you quick, rapid questions. Chiu Hokun is asking, are divisive persons or personality good for relationships? How can you overcome this?
In what way? I need an example because it's a bit hard to.
Okay, so I'm assuming, and I know him enough to assume. So I'm thinking, because you spoke about your chosen self and your ideal self, right? So if you are divided that way, is it good for relationships, and how you can overcome it? And I'm assuming, and let's go with that assumption for now, unless he clarifies it.
I think the first point is all of us are divided. There's no person. Maybe there is lah, but I haven't met them yet. But all of us are divided, and when we enter a relationship, that divided self is there in the relationship. Yeah, but and it's a reality that we have to face, and the friction in the relationship is the room for growth. So I wouldn't say it's good or bad. I'm just saying that because you're divided, you are incomplete. We bring our dissatisfactions into the relationship, and that will cause fireworks as usual. And the fireworks gives you the light to see the way forward, so to speak. So
I love the positivity around the firework.
yeah. So I think the fireworks invites us to do some level of inner work, some level of reconciliation, greater level of communication. So yeah, I guess it's neither good nor bad. I guess it's just life. That's the way it is, lah.
Would it be okay for me to say that, when the division shows up and and you want to resolve it, then go with where it takes you and then resolve it, because it's obviously showing up and it means something to you, for you to want to work on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And at some point you might realize that you can't fix it. Most of the couples that come in, I always ask them, when did this problem start? And they will tell you 7, 8, 9 years ago. American research says on average, couples only come in after 6 years of Great War. And by that time, there's so much hurt and pain and hatred.
Yeah.
And it makes the life of the therapist a lot harder.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it'd be more exciting because you get to,
your positions become very fixed, and what they're doing at that point is trench warfare. They come out of the hole, they shoot at each other, they go back into the hole. And, Professor Endorfi, who's like the supervisor of a center, says at that point, only the children are a resource to help the parents, They will only make compromise or come together for kids because they're so entrenched in their position after years of war. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, if you've been experiencing the same behavior for years, then the hope for change is really reduced, isn't it? Like the hope that the other person, or for you to change. Yeah, sounds logical enough. This question you better ace it because it's from Alia. Okay, what happens? It's from Karen. Yeah, what happens when it's unresolved issues with siblings? We can't walk out. It's family. Example, when 2 out of 6 siblings are not talking to each other for so many years, what would your advice be on how best to move forward?
When the family is still intact and the siblings are small, you can resolve the issue because the family unit is still together, right? It's a lot more easier. There's a lot more control. If the conflict is very deep, you need therapeutic intervention. Why exactly sibling conflict appears is there can be many reasons, but normally what happens in a home with sibling conflict is you have camps. 2 siblings are aligned to the mother, 2 are aligned to the father, 2 are just kind of off on their own, wanting to be neutral. So there's some sort of a situation at home that divides the siblings in the first place. Now there's this famous American therapist called Carl Whittaker, and I've never tried this. But Whittaker, what he did after he retired, is he started to work with 30, 40 people in a room. So he bring the family, the cousins. These are families that have been at war for 2, 3 generations, right? And the siblings don't get along, and he actually does therapy with everybody in a conference ballroom in a hotel, and gets them to talk to each other. So really, he uses the same principles, and he still gets them to talk to each other. But without such an intervention, I think the motivation for adult siblings, right? So if normally siblings who don't get along, you find one person in UK, one person in Australia, one person in the US, and how do you bring them together? It becomes a lot harder. So if the siblings are not getting along when they are still at home in their teenage life, I think that's a good time to make an intervention so that the family stays together. If you wait
so what
too
happens
long,
in childhood then, because you've already built the foundations to get them to stick together, right?
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks, Darrell. Ali, if you're not happy, we are getting him back, so you know what to do with him when you see him next.
Or we can talk about it over a phone call.
No. We want to do this public thing because we want audience who are with us to gain from it, right? So yeah, I think we've handled all of that question. So in summary, what you're saying is, when we talk about the divided self, it is quite natural to have the divided self. So that's what I'm getting. We all, Alia says she has your number. Okay, sorry. Yes, but do it publicly, Alia, because we want to hear Darrell's answer too, right? So one is we all, would have some form of divided self because, we are finding ourselves when we are growing. That's what you're saying. And if it shows up as problem, then go, either, get skills or speak to the likes of wise people like Darrell to get it sorted. The faster we recognize it, the faster we deal with it, then our hopes and chances are better. So that's what you've said. We've also spoken about, how some of these things are biological. But most interestingly, I think we spent a lot of time looking at, what happens at childhood. And, as parents, how we can bring, nurturing and discipline together. We need to find the balance, in parenting so that the child then has a differentiated identity as early, right? And that has a lot to do with the parents and, what they bring into the relationship. You also did say that, that children are not learning from what we say, but how we live our life, because that's what they are taking in. Because a lot of times we think about the conscious things that we are saying and we expect that to shape them. But children are watching what we do and how we live our life. And, that's another golden nugget that you brought in. But by the way, you also agreed that you will come in as often as we call you so that you tell us more things, because you've given us a lot of resources, which we need to get our hands on, right? Is there anything else I've missed out that you want to add on before I ask you a few rapid questions?
I think, sometimes we deal with questions in a almost generic way, but I think the real therapeutic process is much more complex, much more slow. So this is kind of a sharing, so I kind of simplify the story. So I don't want to oversimplify problems and issues. I just a kind of disclaimer here, just to mention that, because a lot of what we talk about is very complex stuff.
Sure.
That took years to develop, and it will take some time if you're trying to address some of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you keep saying that. I think the whole idea of doing this is to create awareness for us to recognize that there are issues, and these issues are normal part of human living and being human, right? And for us to know that when these issues crop up, that, if we don't have the resources, if we are not skilled in that way, we're not built that way, we need to go and get help, because, we wait for the problem until the problem becomes so big. And like what you said, you wait too long, even though you go and get help, we might not, come back with hope or be willing to change to make it work. And it's sad, because then, this problem is going to be passed on, right?
Mm.
And I think that's what we are trying to do with Being Whole, Being Me series, to actually tap into the way, the speakers think, the way speakers deal with issues, so that we get nuggets of wisdom. I mean, if we just take one idea back from what you said today, and we become better individuals, better parents, just better siblings, better people, I think the 1 hour is already worth it, Darrell. So no need to worry so much, okay? All right.
Okay.
Any last one? No, you cannot do one liners. 3-liner wisdom that you want to give about living with the divided self.
Yeah, I think the three-liner wisdom would be, it's normal to be divided,
Yes.
and I think adult work is trying to bring the two selves together, looking for
Yes.
congruence. The word is congruence. Rogers also uses the word congruence.
Yes.
And I think the more congruent we are, the better our self-esteem would be, the happier we would be. And I think our contribution would be more genuine also. Yeah, so I
Nice.
think this search for the congruence, I think, is really the part of adult life. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. The word congruence was introduced to me by my dearest Terry Neto.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
word,
Yeah,
congruence,
it's a good word. Yeah. And you've done us two big favors today, Darrell. Which means I get to call you back, because you've done two things for us without you knowing. One is, by talking about living with the divided self, and bringing us together in the concept of congruence, which is what Being Whole, Being Me is all about, because it's about finding our parts that makes us feel at home with ourselves, to find fulfillment, so that we live a full life, right, in different aspects. So I'm taking that for advertisement for the work that we do. That's what Being Whole, Being Me is all about. And you were very, very kind to say EQ is important, because and that's the space that we are trying to create awareness for day-to-day living. So
Mm.
with that, I want to really thank you for your time, your patience, and the stress that you go through trying to, shorten your sentence, speed up the way you speak. And I just want to thank you again for your time. Be assured we're going to call you back, and just get ready to say yes to us. Thank you very much, Darrell. Have a great weekend ahead, and stay safe.
Thank you, Mala. Very enjoyable conversation. I see you soon. Yeah.
Okay,
Bye.
since he enjoyed it, he's going to come back again, I'm sure. So put in your questions, if you have, not just for today's session, but what else would you like to know, so that we can bring some of these specialists and experts, to share with us, the kind of issues. If you don't want to put it publicly, DM me, because we are on the lookout of people who can share these stories with us. As I say that, and just before I say goodbye, this is the last session for the month of July. Next month, we are going to celebrate what does it mean to be a great Malaysian. We're going to bring in, people who are contributing to a better Malaysia. So stay tuned with us. Try and make yourself free on Fridays from 12 to, you realize 1 o'clock is difficult because I talk a lot, to 1:15. And with that, I'll see you again next week, Friday, 12 o'clock, with a new superhero who's going to share with us how to live extraordinary lives in a very simple manner in our Being Whole, Being Me series. Signing off, Malan from Hearts and Minds Development Center. Stay safe, and I'll see you next week. Bye.